without further ado, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our four speakers. Today, we are joined by Georgina Bowyer, who's an Associate Principal Scientist at AstraZeneca, by David Gibson, who's a synthetic and medicinal chemist at Domain X. Welcome, David and Georgina. And we have Rob Howes, who's a Senior Director at Charles River Laboratories, and Maria Primo, who is a Principal Scientist at Camina Bioscience. So a huge welcome to the four of you to this session, and thank you so much for sharing your time and insights with us this afternoon. So really, I guess just to set the purpose of the session, we decided that it would be a great opportunity actually to allow our audience of undergraduate, masters, PhDs and postdocs to hear directly from scientific hiring managers, i.e. those who are working in research in life science companies, in order that you can hear firsthand how you can figure out how to place yourself into research roles in industry. And as I think we'll see from the discussion, that is likely to be a sort of multifaceted answer. So within this hour, we have got likely a bunch of questions between us, and I'm really grateful to those of you who have uploaded in advance the questions that you had to the form that we shared in Handshake. So we're grateful to that, and I've got those questions noted down, and I'm going to ask them and synthesize them so we can ask the relevant questions to our speakers. And in terms of asking other questions, let's continue to use the chat function now, so that we don't have too many places to share questions. One thing I did want to say in advance, though, of asking your questions, I'd be really grateful if you could consider your question before you ask it. And the reason that I'm asking you to consider it is because as individuals, we all have specific circumstances which we often need, answers to our own circumstances. But since we're learning as a sort of group of people, as a collective today, we'd be grateful if we could keep the questions focused on how we could all learn rather than asking about individual circumstances. And if you do want to speak to someone about your specific circumstances, you can always book a one-to-one appointment with a careers consultant. And we've got the Life Science Fair coming up next Tuesday. So you can, in fact, meet 30 plus life science employers there and have a one-to-one conversation with those people. So that's a great opportunity for you to do that. The other thing I wanted to say is that we are going to be focusing by and large on research roles today, but we do have plenty of resource and information and events, in fact, coming up that will help you focus on those non-research roles. So I've got a link to those at the end of the session to share with you. And also, I think all of the organisations, the four companies we've got represented today, have got great careers pages listing their opportunities, their careers, the rewards and benefits of being in their organisation. And they're normally quite easy to find from their homepage and going into the About Us section, and you'll find careers from there normally. So there's plenty of opportunities for you to have a little look on their websites after today if you've got questions about their opportunities, etc. So a little bit of scene setting from me in terms of how we're going to use our time today. In a moment, I'm going to ask our speakers to introduce themselves and share with you their journey to date, a little bit about their current role in organisation, as well as one top tip for learning about research jobs in industry. And then after about 10-15 minutes, we'll go into questions from you in the audience, some of which I've got already here to go with. And then we'll close with thanks to our speakers and sharing further resources that we have for you and information about the Life Science Fair, which I can see my colleague Lucy has shared. And then finally, we'll be inviting you to share your feedback. So one thing I did want to say is that I'm joined by Lucy Romain today, who's a careers consultant and the point person for the School of Biological Sciences, and Nick Watt, who's our employer engagement liaison person with companies in the life science industry. Hi, Nick and Lucy, and they're going to be in the chat, and they will be able to answer some of your questions and help me to identify which themes we should be looking at when it comes to questions. So I will leave that there. Thank you all very much for hearing me out on that introduction. And so without further ado, I'm really delighted to more properly introduce our speakers by inviting them to share the opening with us for today's session. So I'm going to ask Georgina from AstraZeneca if you would be able to go first with your opening introduction.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. It's great to share my experience with you. So I'm currently an associate principal scientist at AstraZeneca, leading a team within clinical immuno-oncology discovery department. And my broad background is translational human immunology. So I did an undergraduate degree at Cambridge University. So I did natural sciences with a part 2 in pathology. And then after that, I thought I might want to do a PhD, but I wasn't really sure. So I went to the University of Oxford as a research assistant, and I worked on clinical trials of malaria and Ebola vaccines at Adrian Hill's lab at the Jenner Institute. And I actually ended up staying within that lab to do my PhD. So in total, I was there for 3 years as an RA, and then 3 years as a PhD. After which I moved back to Cambridge for a postdoc in Menna Clatworthy's lab on renal tissue immunity, so something quite a different field of research. And I made the transition to industry in August 2022, moving to, again, a different field within immuno-oncology, initially as a senior scientist. And I lead the bioscience for novel drugs as they move into the clinic, so really kind of focusing on my interest in human immunology and translational impact. And then I was promoted this year, so after about a year and a half of being here. I currently lead a small team of a scientist, a senior scientist, but I also have an AstraZeneca postdoc, and I co-supervise a University of Cambridge PhD student. So I've got a bit of experience of hiring lots of different roles now.
That's great. Thank you, Georgina. And if I were to ask you what your top tip might be for our audience in terms of learning about research roles in industry, what might that be?
Yeah, I think really reach out as much as you can. It can seem quite a scary black box. I think before I made the move, I didn't really know or have many contacts within industry. Um, it's worth reaching out on LinkedIn. Like, you're not always going to get a hit, but it really is worth trying. It's a bit like applying to undergraduate labs for a placement. You'll get some people completely ignoring you, and you'll get others that will engage with you. And I think that way you can just learn as much as possible about the roles that are available.
Thank you, Georgina. That's a great tip. Thank you so much. So next I'm going to come to David, please, for your introduction.
Hello. Yes, I started out as an undergraduate at University of Cambridge doing natural sciences. So I started as what I thought would be a biologist, and ended up, because of the breadth of the natural sciences course, moving into chemistry, particularly in second year and then third year, and then continued on to do my master's with he was then Dr. Robert Phipps, and now Professor Phipps, doing asymmetric catalysis. I then stayed in his research group at Cambridge to do my PhD in asymmetric organic catalysis and metal catalysis. And that finished in 2021. And then in early 2022, I started my role here at Domainix as it says there, synthetic and medicinal chemist. Initially as a senior scientist 1, then got promoted last year to senior scientist 2. So my role day to day can look different depending on what project I'm on. We can have quite small projects where I might be working on my own for a particular project for a couple of months, or I might be working in a team of 6 or 10 people, depending on the project that we're involved in. At my level, I can be managing small teams, but again, that because of the nature of the work we do, contract research, so that can change. I've been at both ends of the spectrum within the last year, so some experience of individual research and experience of managing teams as well. I really would echo Georgina's comment of, you've got to reach out to people who know the sorts of roles that you're looking for, so they can be ex-PhD students who you met when you were a first-year PhD student, or some friends who might have moved on a year ahead of you and are now in the roles that you're applying to, and they can really tell you what's the role like, what things are the particular companies looking for, and yeah, I think that was what particularly helped me.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So ways to find people, might be thinking of who's just a stage above you. That's really helpful. Thank you. So next, for an introduction, Rob, I'll come to you, please.
I'm feeling the pressure to do this in 4 minutes. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Rob Howes. So I'm currently working at Charles River, which is a contract research organisation. We're located just south of Cambridge. We're actually a really big US organisation, and you'll probably come across us as you do a lot more in your careers. Most people end up working with us at some point. So how the hell did I get here? So I think compared to the other two, I did my undergraduate in Glasgow, and I actually came down to Cambridge for my PhD. So I worked at the LMB over at Addenbrooke's for my PhD. I was in Matthew Freeman's lab, who currently is now over at the Dun in Oxford. After that, I thought academia was going to be where I would end up. So I did a postdoc in the States with one of the Wellcome Travelling Fellowships. Was out there for a couple of years, but then decided to come back to the UK. So I came back to Cambridge and worked in Sarah Bray's lab over in anatomy, whilst it was still in anatomy. All my research was around pathway signaling using fruit flies as a research model. And I kind of got to that point of like, this is great, but it's not really my thing. And I was at probably the same situation as a lot of you, which is how the hell do I find out about industry? I did the kind of slightly crazy thing of just driving around all the science parks, writing down the list of companies, surfing the websites, found one that was hiring. And it was really interesting to me that they really valued the kind of depth and breadth of academic experience into the company, which was a bit of a surprise to me, because I kind of went in there having no idea what was going on. So I think just by attending this today, you will all know more than I did when I got my first job. So I started off in a small company at Granta Park, so again, south of Cambridge, using structure-based methods to do drug design. And I was there for about 7 years. I started off in the lab as a bench scientist, but then I was offered the chance to kind of start leading a team, and I ended up moving areas. So I moved away from an oncology bench-based role actually into managing our high throughput screening platform across the whole of the organization. And that was great. It was a really interesting time. But later on, I then, with a couple of others, we set up a company called Horizon Discovery. So it was a gene editing technology in the old days before CRISPR. Can you imagine such a thing? That we did. And that was really interesting to go from a fairly well-established company to there's just 3 of you, you've got to make this thing work, find lab space and all of that stuff. I was there for about 5 years. We went from 3 of us up to about 200 people. But I decided that because they were generating cell lines and kind of selling that as a product, I kind of wanted to get back into drug discovery. So I moved over to MedImmune as was. So that's the antibody discovery arm of AstraZeneca. So I was there leading a group that was doing the profiling of new antibodies against particular targets across lots of different disease areas, and also starting to lead some projects myself. And after about 3 or 4 years there, I was asked to go and lead a larger group within the bigger AstraZeneca organization. So I moved over to Sweden for 5 years and was doing a lot of commuting backwards and forwards, but leading a team of kind of 80 people over in Sweden in the kind of same sort of space of, developing assays, getting them ready for high throughput screens, a lot of the profiling work downstream of an HTS as you're then starting to develop the drug. That was great. That was up until COVID. I ended up getting stuck doing COVID testing for 3 years. I ended up leading a lab just outside of Birmingham with about 1,200 staff that was running 24 hours a day. That's probably a whole separate conversation. It was a bit of a mad part of my career. That lab closed down a couple of years ago. So since then I've been working at Charles River. And again, what we currently do is developing drugs, working with clients though. So we don't develop our own drugs. We work with people who are developing them with all of the kind of technologies that you would need around that to be able to allow people to access them. I'm going to stop there because that's where I am so far.
I was on mute. Sorry. I was going to say, yes, I was going to say, no, just thank you. That was really interesting to hear. And lots more questions could be asked about the experience of managing such a large lab during COVID. But yeah, if it's all right to take your top tip, that would be great.
Got three, and I'm trying to work out which one. One is actually, I mean, you've probably heard us talking about senior scientist, associate principal scientist, right? Industry's got its own lingo. It's probably good to learn that lingo because then you can understand what the career levels are that you might expect to move into and where you might move up. The other one is actually volunteer with some organizations. So I'm on the board of an organization called LRIG, and that's kind of all to do with drug discovery. And we are always looking for people, especially from academia, who want to volunteer. And that's a great way to get a network, understand how it works. And, you know, that's going to really help you if you want to then get into an industry-based job.
Thank you so much, Rob. I've just noticed, I don't know if it's the same for other people, the audio when you were speaking just became a little bit scrambled. I'm not sure if that's the technical word. I don't know if I could still hear you, but there was a bit of scrambling. I don't know if it's a Bluetooth connection, but I could still hear you, but just okay. Letting you know in the background. But thank you so much for that, Rob. That point about lingo and getting used to the language of the person that will end up recruiting you is really, really important. So thank you for raising that. And finally, Maria, I'd love to come to you and hear your introduction and your top tip.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Maria. So I'm Portuguese and I come from Portugal. And I started my academic journey as a biologist. So I did a bachelor in biology throughout the 3 years in Portugal. And I was actually quite curious because I wasn't sure by the end of my biology bachelor what did I wanted to do. Wanted to try other educational systems as well. So I engaged into an interchange program and I traveled to Denmark where I started my master in molecular biology. And what I had initially planned to be just a 6 months interchange, it ended up being 7 years. So I ended up doing all my master there. I was involved in a lab with gene therapy and innate immunology, and I really enjoyed the work. So I was invited to stay and do a PhD. So that's just how suddenly life goes. And by the end of my PhD, I had the opportunity to work in different collaborations with different universities across Denmark as well. And I felt I was lacking some skills related to bioinformatics, completely different field from what I was used to do, molecular biology and immunology. And I actually, I applied for a postdoc at the Gymnam campus in Cambridge, and it was when I actually reached the UK. And there I was very straightforward and very transparent, saying that yes, I would love to continue working in immunology because it was related to immune cell differentiation and single cell RNA-seq. But I was also, I openly said that I also wanted to learn bioinformatics skills, and that was something I wanted to invest my time in as well during my postdoc. And people there were very open. So it was actually, I found it very useful because it gave me the opportunity to continue working in the field that I liked it, but also learn basic skills in something that would complement my research. And throughout the postdoc, I actually found out that I wanted to leave academia. I love working together with other people in a collaborative manner and a lot of interchange between teams. And I couldn't really feel that throughout my postdoc. It was pretty much myself and my project. So I thought this is possibly, the right point for me to make that transition. And it was actually throughout the careers fair also from Cambridge University that it's advertising here today, that gave me a great opportunity just to explore the different companies that were there, talking to people also because for me, industry was also very much this unknown. What can I do on the other side? And sometimes I think there's a little bit of misconceptions. And yeah, I found an easy way to transition to industry in the beginning of 2020, and that's where I've been since then. Initially, focusing on mouse model engineering and antibody discovery companies, and then last year I transitioned to community bioscience. That it's a completely different field, DNA synthetic DNA synthesis. So there is we can always change. I think there's great opportunity to do that. And I was initially hired as a senior scientist, and today I'm working as a principal scientist, leading a small team of scientists and senior scientists as well, doing research within Camina Bioscience.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And your top tip, Maria, might it relate to?
Yeah, I think it would be very much talking to people. I think that's very, just to have a feeling of what other people do and what are the different options you can have in industry. Those careers fairs, I found it very useful for me as well. And I also, yes, I agree with Rob in the sense of the terminology in industry. Sometimes also within the company size, there are different expectations and roles, whether you're in a startup or you're in a big pharma, of what a senior scientist or a research associate or scientist. So don't get so inhibited about those terms, because yeah, there's a lot of opportunities within them.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you to all four of you for those introductions. They were so rich in terms of information for people who might be thinking of making a move from whatever point they're in at Cambridge at the moment to an industry role. So huge thanks to all of you for that. So I'm going to come to one of the first questions that was actually shared on the form that we gave to people to fill out in advance of today's session, and slightly combine it with a question or two that I've seen in the chat that has been asked. So the question was about only having experience in a couple of university labs. So if that's the case, and I'm assuming this question might have been asked by somebody at undergraduate or master's level, they wonder how can they make that stand out if the experience is just at a couple of university labs. And then the sort of correlating question, or adjacent question, if you like, is someone was asking about are industry internships valuable before or during the PhD? So it's a two-pronged question about experience. And I wondered if I could come to you on this, first of all, Georgina, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I only actually had experience, any long-term experience in 2 different labs before I made the move. I think the key is to make the experience you have got count. So you don't need lots of varied experience, just relevant experience. Link what experience you do have to the job advert and give examples of how you've used that experience rather than just listing what you've done. So we're kind of impact driven. So we like to see what the outcome of a project was. So for example, if you're naming a particular technique, how did you use it? Did it contribute to a paper or a grant? Did you present that work anywhere? So we like to see those kind of outcomes, and you can gain that in just one lab. You don't need to have been to lots of different places. I think was there another part to that question?
Yeah, and it was, I wonder if sort of your answer has covered that as well, because it was someone asking whether they need an internship in industry
Yes.
to get the position.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of people within AstraZeneca, I don't know about other places, that have got various internships within industry. It can be a really useful way either before or during your PhD to gain insight. And what it shows us is that you have kind of explored that as a career option, and you know kind of what that would entail. But you definitely don't need that, because there are lots of people here as well that, myself included, didn't have any previous experience.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Georgina. And actually, I think this question, it would be really helpful to get all of your take on this. So if I could come to you next, Rob, as you're sitting next to Georgina on my screen.
Yeah. Internships are great if you can do them and you have access to them, because it should, you get to get a really good set of contacts within whatever company you go and work at, but you just get the experience of working in a team. So you're primarily going to be working at least in a small team, if not a larger project team. and that's really useful because everything we do is team-based within industry. And remind me the first part of the question.
Thanks, Rob. The first part of the question was someone who's got experience in a couple of university labs only. How could they make that stand out?
I think Georgina answered it. It's about what did you do? It's what problems did you solve? How did you contribute to those? And even simple things like what techniques have you, do you really master, and do you really understand what you're doing with those particular techniques?
Fab, that's great. Thank you so much, Rob. David, since you're next to Rob.
Yeah, similar themes. I guess in chemistry, within chemistry, we maybe look to more, yes, what are those skills that you've learned? So I'd only worked in one lab before I moved here, in my master's and PhD, but within that, I'd done reaction screening. I'd also done multigram synthesis, and those two ends, it was the emphasis of those two ends of the chemistry that I'd done, along with some other skills that I'd learned along the way, those were the things that were emphasized. And we've seen it since in people who've interviewed well or not interviewed well. If you emphasize the skills that you've gained, and those are the skills that we're looking for. How does this person fit into our team? What skills will they add to that team? Rather than necessarily what work have you done?
Okay, so the skills that you brought about in doing that experiment or working on that project.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, David. And Maria, finally, if I could come to you, what your opinion might be on both having only a couple of bits of experience. Bits sounds like I'm demeaning it or minorizing it somehow, but you've worked in a couple of university labs, or is industry important in terms of having an internship?
I think both what David and Rob said in different ways. It is industry. It's a lot about collaboration, and something that I didn't appreciate it probably throughout academia, my time in academia until I joined industry, is that throughout my master and my PhD, I did multiple small projects in collaboration with other teams and universities. And sometimes when I was writing my CVs for postdoc applications, I was focusing on my main project and leaving all these bits and bobs behind. But I think they were equally important, and sometimes it's small contributions that you do to other projects, but it also shows you're flexible, you're willing to learn, you're engaged with other things. So yeah, I think that is quite relevant. And the skills as well, mentioning also very different sorts of small soft skills, also like presentations, collaborations. It's very important to mention. And I think sometimes when we're screening throughout CVs, people like to leave that in the end. And it's a bit of a shame because probably they've done a lot. And they should definitely mention.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, that's very interesting that actually there is the consideration of the non-technical skills that we need to look at, which is really interesting. Before we do go on to talk about those perhaps non-technical skills, though, there was a question that was put in the form, and people have been referring to it in the chat as well, which I think is really about how closely you need to be connected to the area of research that's being done in that company. As sort of determined by the place that you're coming from, how close a match to those research themes need to be. So the question that was asked in the form is there scope as a scientist to pivot to different research areas? Do you need to become a real specialist in an incredibly niche area, or can you have broader research interests? So I guess the question here is, how well do you need to match a research area? Do you need to have all the technical skills? Can you pivot away from what you've done during your academic career and I mean that in all senses of the word, to something slightly different, technically speaking. So Maria, I might come to you again on this one, because I noticed in your introduction you said that you did have a bit of a pivot in terms of the research area.
Yes, I did, and pretty much done immunology throughout all my, well, definitely throughout all my academic career, and even when I switched to industry in the first job I was doing, working in the field of immunology in drug discovery. And then I saw this very exciting role at Camino Bioscience and just focus on synthetic DNA. Of course, I still needed the technical skills within molecular biology that they were, I mean, yeah, you can use them in multiple different fields. But, and I think what made me apply for this role, it's actually the fact that we have to accept the fact that when you're applying for a job, it's always a little bit of a gamble. You do not know who you're competing against and who else also applied for that role. Probably, I don't know if I would have applied for the role in a different round of applicants, I would have been selected or not, because clearly I am transitioning from an immunology field to a synthetic DNA biology. But I think some people are all worried if they tick all the boxes, like essential skills, and maybe you have many other transferable skills that do not meet the eye immediately, but you could use them in this new job. So I think there's opportunity for both, and I would always encourage people to apply, even if they don't think they meet all the necessary criteria, because they still might be actually the top candidate.
All right, thank you so much, Maria. And I just wonder, in terms of picking up perhaps new technical skills or learning a new about new areas of this the synthetic DNA, what was that like when you were sort of first going into industry?
I think it was a learning journey again, in a completely different way. But it almost felt like being a student again. You get trained in the lab, you learn new technologies, you're doing your research, reading throughout papers, and I really enjoy to be in the bench, even though I'm not in the bench that often anymore. I like just to get my hands dirty and just try. And that's the best way, at least for me and for some of my colleagues, to learn. Just have a go at it and try it yourself. If you don't know it, there's always opportunity for learn. And in a small company, Camino is just a startup. We're around 20 employees at the moment. There's opportunity to do different things and jump into very different projects. And sometimes it's just, okay, let's have a go. Probably many times also doesn't work at the first time, doesn't matter how specialist you are. But if you're willing to try and to learn, I think people really appreciate that.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing that with us. And I wonder if I could maybe carry on with the same question in terms of how close you need to be to the technical skills required in a job description, and perhaps ask you, Rob, in your experience of managing different size labs, how you might answer that question. What would your advice for our audience be if they've got that concern that it's not quite their research area, they're moving away from their safe bit of knowledge or their technical skills that they've picked up when they're looking at a different job?
It probably comes down to the type of role you're looking at. So there are going to be some specific roles where there are absolute requirements for some technical skill or some, deep knowledge of a particular area. I'm kind of looking at Georgina and Maria, right, being relatively senior scientists within a particular area. People might expect you to have a deep knowledge in one area, but actually most of you will have massively transferable skills into it, across the lab. It kind of falls into big groupings around molecular biology, cell biology, immunology. Those things become really transferable. So I would never stop yourself from applying for something if you don't have all of the skills. It's maybe even worth contacting the hiring manager at the company and just say, look, are they, this is my skill set. Are there any critical skill sets that you need for this role? And then usually you'll find there's one thing they're really looking for, and everything else is negotiable. And actually what they're looking for is, one of the benefits that all of you on this call have is that you're working at the university or one of the university departments, and that carries a lot of weight. Like when we're looking to hire people, if you've had some time spent within the university, we know the standard that brings you out at, and that's really beneficial for us as employers. So, use that to your advantage as well.
Thank you so much, Rob. That's also really helpful because I don't know, you can probably see the chat, but there's quite a few questions that I recognise people are asking about how to work out whether you should apply for a job based on the requirements that you can see there. Georgina, since it is such an important topic for our audience, obviously, is there anything that you would like to add to that as well?
Yeah, I think I would say it feels harder. It's a harder step if you're also making a step to industry, if you're moving field as well. So the sort of energy to get into that can be harder. I mean, I had the same experience, but I think the key is to kind of pull on key themes from your broader experience. So I've moved into immuno-oncology. I didn't have a lot of oncology experience, but I had done a small collaboration and I drew on that experience and then really like honed in on the skill set that I'd learned that was broader immunology. And when I got here, I found out that there are some people whose entire careers have been on immune oncology and they're still working on that thing. And sometimes you can find those people a little bit intimidating, but there are also a lot of people with very broad backgrounds who've done very, very different types of research. And actually, people look for that breadth in their teams because it brings different skill sets and perspectives. So I think absolutely what Rob was saying, it's worth thinking about which other skills you have that you could bring. And what Maria was saying, you don't necessarily know what that one thing that they're looking for is going to be. So it's definitely worth applying if you find a job that you think you would be interested in.
It's very interesting what you've all said in terms of the type of organisation that you're in and the opportunities for learning, but also before you get into the organisation, scrutinising a job description and not being afraid to ask about it, to highlight what specific things mean. And as Georgina alluded to, there were perceptions of things and people that you have, and then actually that might change when you speak to people from within those organisations. That's really helpful. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to the questions that were asked on the form, but Nick and Lucy are both keeping me informed of things that are happening in the chat separately. So any other very specific questions that are new, they will pop in a separate chat for me to see. So there is a question about general degree level requirements of employees if they want to work in research development and especially research in big pharma or in CROs, contract research organizations. Do you think there is a level of requirement to grow and work within research in terms of qualification? David, I'll come to you first on that one and then move over to someone else.
Sure. I guess it depends on what is the role being offered. Sometimes there may be sort of entry-level roles for people post master's degree. A lot of our roles are post PhD. Just with the nature of the work, particularly with small project work, there's not a lot of time to train on project. So you're looking for people who have experience of the sort of PhD level of experience to quickly get onto a project and go through without sort of having a lag time of training in some of the skills that you would naturally pick up during a PhD. We do also recruit sort of associate principal and principal scientist. In chemistry, that tends to be less commonly recruiting from academia. It's most commonly pre and post PhD that we would hire from, but again, it depends on the role being offered.
Okay, that's great. So again, pay attention to the particular role because there are reasons that people might be putting a certain level down for that job description. Georgina, if I could come to you on that one as well, do you have a sense of that level of qualification being required?
Absolutely. So we do hire at pretty much every level. I would say within AstraZeneca specifically, scientist generally means post-bachelor's or post-master's. Senior scientist, we would usually be hiring post-PhD. Often people have 1 to 2 postdocs, may even be a junior PI. And then associate principal scientists would usually be hired from within industry. So really you're looking at scientists, senior scientists kind of level jobs. And I think that's quite useful to know because it can be really difficult from the outside to kind of determine what level you should be applying at, even from looking at the job description. But we also have postdoc positions as well, if you're interested in kind of more research-based work. And we take PhD students on our program as well. So there's a real mix of roles available.
Fantastic. And then a follow-up question within that. So in that mixture of roles, if you're applying from undergraduate or PhD level, to what extent are academic records taken into account? So that might be grades from undergraduate courses, publications, for example, and that kind of other academic, I guess, output, and the grades that you've achieved. How much is that taken into account, would you say, Georgina?
Yeah, I think we kind of take a look at everything really. A lot of it's to do with your experience more than your sort of academic credentials. But of course, we do look at that, at least in my department. I was quite surprised by how much weight people actually put on publication records. In my department, we do take a kind of academic approach, and we are really interested to see that as one of the main metrics of people's kind of output from their research. That doesn't need to be high impact first author papers. We like to see evidence of collaboration, so we really like to see co-authored publications as well. But I actually didn't initially put all of my publications down on the job advert, and I know that the hiring manager expressed some surprise that I didn't have more publications. And I actually said, well, I didn't realize that you wanted to see them, so it's worth including that on your application because we are still interested in that as an output.
That's really interesting, actually. Thank you very much for sharing that. And Rob and Maria, coming to both of you, Rob first, do you have anything different to say on that?
I do. I disagree. So we're really keen on any level of qualification. So we have a lot of apprentices who've just come post A level, as well as obviously everything upwards from, bachelor's all the way through to PIs. 2 of the most successful people I know, who both now VPs within AstraZeneca, have got bachelor's, they don't have PhDs. And there's a massive perception that you need a PhD to be really successful within industry. You really don't, right? It's all about delivery of what you do once you're there. If you're in a company and you're delivering, you'll be massively successful. And in terms of your other 2 questions around academic record, the main thing that we want to know is that it's real. We just do a lot of just checking that when you say you did a degree somewhere or you work somewhere, we'll just verify that that was true. But publications, they're a massive bonus. I mean, it's good description by Georgina around, certainly in some areas where you're heavy in the biology, your publication record's important. But I definitely emphasize the point of any publications you've got are a bonus. They're not something that's going to hold you back. And I think your publication record in industry is viewed differently to one that's in academia. It's often harder to get papers out in industry, certainly as like first author papers. And we really appreciate people that have got a good publication record and can bring that into organizations.
Great, that's really interesting. So a slightly different take on the requirements there, but an agreement on the value of the publications. David, you were nodding along at some point there. In agreement, anything to counter or add? Or?
I think I think mostly it's the publications. They can add great value, but I think there's also don't don't be afraid of if you've had projects that haven't worked and so haven't been published, they can often take large chunks of your research time, but you've got essentially nothing to show for it in your publication record. And just because you don't have publications to show for it, that's where it's more difficult to show what you've done, how you've contributed to the research, but it's somewhere where maybe more so at interview or in a cover letter, you can explain some of that research that maybe you wouldn't be able to put down as a paper.
So still using that unpublished work, as it were. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And Maria, very quick, I'm conscious of time, so I'm just wondering if in a smaller organisation, there's a different perspective on academic grades and level of entry.
Yeah, we recruit at different levels as well. So yeah, from associate scientist to principal scientist. I think if you have industrial experience, but let's say you finished your bachelor and you didn't know if you wanted to continue your academic career, so you go try industry, I think that's equally valuable. And if you decided to stay on, that will allow you to move forward in your career as well, like Rob mentioned. I think that's, people sometimes underestimate that. They think, at least myself, I thought I need to have a PhD before I can apply into industry. And then, after I joined industry, I found out that that's not necessarily true. So if people, some people like more, practical and would rather finish their bachelor's or master level and join industry, and that's definitely feasible. And also for us, I think as a small organization, we also value a lot, values and skills. So yes, if you haven't published work, but you learn different methodologies, you even if it's just basic experience, you didn't go into much depth. I think it's still important to mention. It shows that you're willing to learn, and I think that's especially for small organizations where we need people to jump into very different projects and sometimes doing also things outside of our comfort zone. That really shows that at least you're willing to give it a chance, and people appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Maria. And that sort of leads me into another question that I know has been asked in several places, which is about the practical differences between doing research in academia and doing research in the lab, like the practical differences. What the logistics of the whole thing like? What's the environment like to work in? And you just started speaking, I think, a little bit there about jumping into new projects. Could you speak to that question at all about those differences?
I think an important thing is ownership, in the sense that sometimes priorities change, and it's not that the project that you're working on, it's necessarily dismissed, but sometimes company goals and priorities can change very rapidly, and therefore you might need to put on hold what you've been working for the last, maybe it could be just a few weeks or maybe a couple of months, and focus and jump on something else and help someone else to push that forward instead. In that sense, the dynamic, I think it's different. I think timelines as well. I think there's also sometimes, at least while I was in academia, I didn't have rigid deadlines in that sense. Sometimes you hit walls, and of course you need more time to figure out those problems, those scientific problems. But I think in industry, there's a clear question whether is this worth the time that you're spending on to continue investing on that, or should you try a different strategy? And sometimes for some people, that's also hard to cope with. Others are very eager just to be happy and change the approach and jump into something completely new. Other ones have a harder time to let go. I think that was probably the main difference I felt between academia and industry.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Maria. And David, I'd like to put the same question to you as well, if that's okay, please. The main differences between researching in academia and in industry.
Oh, well, I guess for us in industry, the main thing, because we do contract research, it's it's clients, and it depends what you do and what direction the project goes in very much depends on the client. You can have some clients who are very prescriptive about what they want, and so you have to follow the instructions to the letter. There are other clients who give you more free rein as to how to get to the particular end goal. And so you have to be flexible with what the client wants. In academia, I guess it also depends on your supervisor, but it's usually self-led. So you've got to make a lot of those decisions yourself. So moving from academia to industry, for moving into the contract research space, there is a lot where you have to just accept that you don't get to make the decisions on the research that you're doing. You have to work as a team. I mean, it will be the case in other areas that you're working in a team, and the team leader has made the decision. Whether you agree with the decision or not, you have to do the research that you've been asked to do. And that in itself, to do that is a skill. And it's something that you maybe don't learn as an academic.
Interesting. That's really helpful, David. It's a really helpful specific insight into the thing that you might not pick up in terms of that flexibility. I'm going to change tack with the question slightly. In terms of technical skills on a CV, Rob, do you have a preference? Let's say a preference, or do you have a suggested way that people can present them on a CV or in an application that makes them stand out particularly well?
Oh God, that's a really hard question. I like CVs that are kind of impactful and do something slightly different with them. I guess what's kind of hard is it's when it's just a list of different technologies. What I'm kind of interested in is what you've done with the technique. So that might be quite a nice way to focus on it, especially if if the role you're looking for requires one or two really key techniques. Kind of bring that out in maybe an example of that shows your technical depth. It could be you've got some publications associated with it, or it could be that I want you to tell me the story of how you having this deep technical knowledge allowed you to make some interesting breakthrough.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. So weave the technical into the examples for a particular role or PhD or undergraduate experience. Thank you. Georgina, do you have a preference in terms of how you like to see technical skills listed?
Yeah, I completely agree with Rob. I also have just a very basic thing to add, is that I quite like to see those things kind of listed against the job requirements in the same order that the job requirements or the job advert is written in. It just makes it so much easier when you're going through hundreds of applications just to sort out who's really got those skills and who doesn't.
I see.
And also include a cover letter, please. I really prefer to see someone explain why their experience is relevant rather than just list their experience.
Great. Okay, so that's really helpful to lift the language, to use it in the order that it's been put in the job description, so that you as a reader recruiter can easily organise the information that the candidate's presenting to you for the job that you're looking at. That's really helpful. Thank you. I am going to squeeze in one very last question, and it relates to a recent article from Nature about a survey that they did. I will share it in the chat. Which asked hiring managers, actually both in industry and in academia, in science, to describe in their own words, if they had two candidates who demonstrated similar levels of technical ability and experience, what factors would help make the final decision on who to hire? The most popular answer to this question was communication skills. So I wonder if each of the panelists might quickly say whether you would say communication skills or whether you say something different. And I'll start with you, Georgina, and work my way across.
I agree communication skills are absolutely key, but I would actually put sort of collaboration and teamwork ability ahead of that. It's really important. The work, as was said earlier, is quite different in nature. You're much less siloed than you might be in your academic research whilst you're working in industry. You might be working as quite a big team where you're not really going to get much individual recognition for what you're doing. And those things might get dropped quite quickly. So I like to see someone who's going to thrive in that environment. And I also look for people who might have a little bit of supervision experience. That might be a sort of internship student that they've looked after in the lab, for example. Obviously depends on the level of the role, but that just gives me a bit of confidence that that person has long-term potential in the company and can grow beyond the role that I'm hiring for.
That's a lovely way of seeing transferable skills. So it's not just for the now, it's for the beyond. So you can do the science, but what kind of talent am I bringing into the company for the future?
Yeah.
Thank you. Rob, I'll move to you. Same question, please.
Totally agree. Communication skills are right up there. Other things, though, how you're going to fit in the team, because often we've got a range of personalities, and one of the tests that we usually do is put you in with the rest of the team and see how you get along with them, because that's really key. Your knowledge of the company and the position that you're applying for, the number of people I've had who just don't really know about the company that you could find in a 2-minute Google search. And it's really important just to know, what are they doing? What does that mean in terms of, I don't know, drug discovery or what else? Ask about the interview type. Sometimes certain companies do different types of interview styles. So AstraZeneca for a long time did values-based interviews, and that's something probably quite different to what a lot of people might expect. And they can throw you off if you're not really prepared for them. And the other one is, like, when you're interviewing, tell me something interesting. Like, I think everyone's got something really interesting about them, whether it's something in their career or something outside of work. But that's a great thing to bring to the interview, because we're doing a lot of interviews and we want to know there's more to you than just your technical skills. We're hiring for potential, we're hiring for the future, and that's what we're really interested in.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's great. David.
I guess I don't have really anything to add. I definitely echo the communication skills, the teamwork, and yes, it's to do with not just can you work in a team, but do you fit into the team, as Rob said. Particularly with, we're a Domain X is a much smaller company than Charles River. So we, within the chemistry department, we all have one open office. We see everyone. Are you going to fit in a small team? Are you going to work together in that team? And that is, I think we have the same, as Rob described, the putting you in with members of the team, seeing how do you interact.
Okay.
Is
So
really
perhaps
important.
at CV stage, that might be about demonstrating that you might have worked with a couple of different teams, no matter how small they are, or loosely termed a team, you might call them.
Yes.
Thanks, David. And Maria.
I think I echoed all the answers.
It's hard to go last with a question like this. Yeah.
No, it is, but I think they're all relevant. We do value questions based interviews to see how people will fit within the team. Also, sometimes it's hard to come forward also with your own mistakes, right? Or when you're in trouble, and so integrity, especially in a collaborative environment, is really important. And I think just be yourself, right? I think sometimes people are too nervous, but we just want to get to know you and see how well you fit in the team. So just be yourself.
Thank you, Maria. That's so helpful and so good to hear. Rob, you've got your hand up. Have you got one more?
I've got one more.
Yeah.
I think I sort of mentioned this briefly before. It's really good to find out who the hiring manager is. And often, because I've done this before, where I've actually just contacted them before the interview and just said, look, in terms of, is this the type of role? Am I the right sort of fit? And actually, even for the interview, this is what I'm thinking of preparing. Is this what you're expecting? So, that back and forward helps, because then I know that if you're then coming into the company, I'm going to be expecting those behaviors from you. So you're not going to be delivering the wrong thing. So that kind of thing, I'd absolutely encourage you to see if you can get in touch with the hiring manager if possible.
Fantastic. A really nice reminder that you can do that where their name is made available, and to know the company and to research them as well. Thank you for adding that. So moving on, I just wanted to remind our audience that they can still register for the Life Science Fair, which is next Tuesday. We have now, if you've signed up and you were on the waiting list, you will now notice that you are registered. And there now are additional spaces for each hour slot. So do take the chance to come along and speak to some of these recruiters. There will be people who work with hands-off roles in science as well, like life science consultancy, etc., etc. So do check that out and register with the link that Lucy has shared in the chat. I was just going to mention the survey. We're really, really grateful to you for being here. We design these sessions with all of you in mind. So if you can share us your thoughts on this session, it really does help us to know what to continue to do more of and what we should change to help you. I also just wanted to say I'm conscious that a lot of people have been asking brilliant questions in the chat, and Lucy's been sharing some information on things that we haven't managed to get to in this discussion. And also just to say that we did do a life science sector briefing on Monday, and I can share the link to that recording with this group when it's ready, so that you can see how we've shared information about the competitive environment that we're in, etc., and how we might respond to that. But absolutely, going to careers fairs, talking to people is a really helpful thing to do in this kind of environment. And then finally, we do have some resources that we can share with you that cover many of these topics, and there are ways that you can take your thinking further through these resources, and I'll pop the slides onto Handshake later so you can see them. We're a couple of minutes over, but I really just wanted to ask if, on behalf of the university and our audience here today, if we could just say an enormous thank you to our speakers who have just been incredible in such a short space of time, not only sharing their own career journeys, their own experiences, and thoughts on that, but also their brilliant tips in terms of what it's like to recruit into these roles. And it is an hour of your very busy time. So we really just want to express and say how grateful we are to all of you for being here with us this lunchtime. And we wish you all a lovely afternoon. And good luck to our audience with all of your applications and your career decision making. It's absolutely a lot for you to be thinking of, but little and often, and being here today is absolutely a huge part of that. So well done to you all for coming along. All right, take good care, everyone, and we'll be closing the session down just now.